The subtitle of the Seattle Philharmonic's upcoming concert is "Something Might Be Made of That Tune." It's a slight reworking of something that Edward Elgar said about the original theme upon which he based his Enigma variations. This was a pivotal piece in his career. He had spent many, many years doing odd jobs and hack work and teaching, and he knew deep inside of himself that he was capable of great things, but never had the opportunity to show the world until the great German-born conductor Hans Richter saw the score to the Enigma variations, decided that it had to be performed, and once this piece was out in the public's hearing, Elgar's career was essentially made, and he never wanted for certainly fame again. Fortune was another story, but he never wanted for fame again. It's a work that I've long wanted to conduct. I wanted to surround it with something else to make a slightly longer second half of the program. And so, since I have a deeply pronounced morbid streak, I decided that I would complement the Elgar by starting the second half of the concert with two other great British composers who also died in 1934. The Capriccio by Gustav Holst and the On Hearing the First Cuckoo in Spring, a very short symphonic poem by Frederick Delius. When Holst, Delius, and Elgar all passed away in that same year of 1934, it automatically catapulted Vaughan Williams to the position of premier British composer. The Enigma Variations is certainly Elgar's most famous work for a couple of reasons that I'm not happy with. A little more about that later. And being that it's a somewhat programmatic piece, I think sometimes people tend to lean too much on the meaning of it. You know, who is this variation supposed to be, and what events is this variation supposed to be depicting? And it really stands so beautifully as absolute music. You don't need a program. You don't need to know that this is his wife, and this is his dear friend so-and-so, and this is his dear friend so-and-so's dog. And I'm going to urge our audience to really listen to it as music. I'm even going to go so far as to not print the program in the program notes, but talk more about its musical content. The theme upon which he bases it is a lovely, plaintive theme that you hear in the strings right off. And it couldn't be simpler if it tried, a few strange harmonic twists notwithstanding. But as we'll see, the variations do tend to get more and more involved. And from that theme, he derives such fantastical variations as a very forceful waltz. At one point, he's got the lowest instruments in the orchestra scuffling around in a very four-square version of it. And a very grand finale that's supposed to be a self-portrait. See, I did lean on the programmatic aspect after all, in which he gives the theme the grandest treatment of all. But the variation that the public knows the best is the ninth variation, which he called Nimrod. And part of the reason that the public now knows it so well is because it has become one of the go-to pieces which an orchestra plays when they are commemorating the passing of a colleague or a very famous musician who was quite beloved of the musical community. And unfortunately, this rather funereal approach to this variation has, I think, led to it's been taken more and more slowly by more and more orchestras and conductors. Elgar was one of the first composers to put metronome marks all over his music, a very clear indication of what he wanted. Every variation has a metronome mark. And I think it's instructive to look at the tempo indication for Nimrod. Well, this is what one frequently hears. So-and-so has just died, etc., etc. and so on for several tortured minutes. Well, I'm going to do Elgar a public service now. I brought my cell phone, which has a metronome app on it, and I'm going to show you exactly how fast he said he wanted it. Okay? So if you really want a dirge-like approach to the piece, there are many recordings from which to choose, but we're choosing to do it Elgar's way. I think, again, to lean of necessity on the programmatic aspect of it, this movement was a tribute to a dear friend of his who was still alive at the time when Elgar wrote it, and was a reminiscence of a lovely evening that they passed together, sharing their profound admiration and love for the slow movements of Beethoven. So it is not a dirge, it's a lovely reminiscence of a very much alive human being. The soloist for our concert is Alina Hove. Alina won our Don Buchel competition last year, and for her vehicle she's going to be playing the violin concerto by Erich Wolfgang Korngold. As you know, the Philharmonic does have an occasional ongoing relationship with music by composers for the cinema. We've played several works by Bernard Herrmann, both from his music for films and a performance of his symphony several seasons ago. A couple of seasons from now, I'm planning a work by Hugo Friedhofer, another great Hollywood composer. More on this as it develops. And it's a pleasure to play this work by Korngold, a violin concerto which over the last couple of decades has really been getting increasingly popular with great virtuosos the world over. The piece is based on several of Korngold's film scores, which he expanded and adapted into the violin concerto format. Delightful piece, very tonal, beautifully orchestrated. It's been a pleasure rehearsing the accompaniment, even in the absence of Ms. Hove, because the accompaniment sounds so good. And of course, every orchestra loves to play material that makes it sound well. I spend an incredible amount of my time listening to music. Not only the music that I love for the umpteenth time, but always on the lookout for music that grabs me, that cries out to me, please, take me under your wing, perform me. And a work that I discovered almost 2 years ago was the Second Symphony by Elsa Baren, a work that I heard on a YouTube link, and within a minute I knew that I'd found something major. I came to her because she was mentioned in passing in a biography I was reading of the great Paul Dukas, composer of The Sorcerer's Apprentice and several other great pieces. And it mentioned her as one of his pupils. She had won the Prix de Rome when she was only 19 years old. And so I found this piece of hers and was utterly captivated and grabbed. And so, of course, I started finding out more and more about her. And in so doing was reminded, possibly more forcefully than ever before, about the really unfortunate plight of women composers up until fairly recently. And it's still not a situation which has righted itself entirely. But I think that somebody of the younger generation coming new to the classical music experience, who starts going to concerts and seeing what's out there, might say, well, certainly women composers are represented today, and they are, and this is a very good thing, but I'm finding out more and more about the utterly neglected, for the most ridiculous reasons possible, great women composers of the 18th, 19th, 20th centuries, simply because it was just a profession that men thought should be male-dominated. And while I'm not a chauvinist by any means, it has caused me to go out and look at a lot more literature by some neglected women composers, and I promise you it's going to figure very prominently in Seattle Philharmonic seasons to come. I urge you to come and hear this symphony. Barrène was French. She lived from 1910 to 1999. Her musical personality is unique and forceful. She herself was apparently a woman of an iron will. During the Second World War, she fought very heavily on the side of the French resistance, doing a lot of work to help Jewish and other potentially persecuted French composers to escape the clutches of the Nazis. And her music shows it. This is uncompromisingly brilliant, passionate writing, and something which I'm hoping maybe will enter the symphonic canon with this as an impetus.